Hello all, this is Saurabh Dhani signing in, and in today's video, we'll be talking about the system requirements for 2023 release wave 1. So if you are a customer who is not on-prem, this is not a video for you. If you are a developer who always deal with customers in Business Central SaaS, again, this is not for you. And others, if you think system requirements are important, let's sit along and let's understand what are the hardware and the software requirement for installation of 2023 release wave 1. So let's get started with looking at the typical components that need to be installed in Business Central environment. So let's start from the bottom, which is the database. So you surely need a database to run Business Central, and that database can be either on your on-prem server or maybe hosted on an Azure server. Both are still considered as on-prem from a Microsoft perspective. Now, the only way to communicate to the server or the database server is using the service tier, which we call the middle tier of Business Central environment. Now, that's the only way how a Business Central client or a web service or a development environment gets connected to the database where the data is. So this becomes our middle tier or the service tier. Now, service tier is a single point of contact where all the client communication or any other communication kind of goes to the database. Let's talk about what are those different options. So you can be a developer who will be using Visual Studio Code to do the development. So to get symbols for your development, you will be using the service tier configuration. For publishing your app on your local environment, you'll also be connecting to the service tier to publish your app into environment. If you are an external entity who would like to talk to Business Central using web services or an APIs, then you will still connect to the service tier where there are web services hosted. If you are an end user who connect via mobile client or tablet client or the browser, which is the default web client, then your connection actually goes through a web server. So the web server kind of becomes another entity in this installation just for the client connection. A web server is a place where the website that get accessed by the clients is hosted. And that's where your site is hosted, and that gets connected to the database via service tier. So now we understand in summary what are the different components, and now let's talk about what are their system hardware and software requirement. As per Microsoft documentation, as always, they provide you the minimum requirements, and then based on your database size and your infrastructure, you can surely size your servers and provide memories as per the memory that you have available. So let's start it again from the bottom. Let's talk about what are the system requirement for the database component, which is SQL Server. So it is not very clearly mentioned what SQL version you need, but looking at the database compatibility, because that's what is mentioned in the Microsoft release note, that for Business Central 2023 release wave 1, your compatibility should be set to 150 or 160 on SQL Server, as I said earlier, or on Azure SQL Server. Now, based on looking at the SQL Server compatibility matrix, in summary, it's found out that you will require a 2019 or a higher version of SQL. Now, if you don't have a SQL Server installed, maybe because you are a developer or you are just testing out Business Central, then Business Central installation component will install a SQL Server 2019 Express Edition, which will which only have the limit of 10 GB of databases, 10 GB total database size. So if you have 5 databases inside an Express Edition, then cumulative size of databases cannot exceed more than 10 GB. So if you are a developer, don't worry about it. The installer will install it. Now, when you are talking about SQL Server, there will be some system requirement for SQL Server. What are those? You can uh, install SQL Server 2019 on a Windows Server 2016 or higher. And the only versions that are supported are Essentials, Standard, and Data Center version of Windows Server. You can also install um, SQL Server 2019 on a Windows 11 or Windows 10 machine only with following editions, which is Developer Edition, Standard Edition, and Express version. Um, and the Professional and Home version here. Now, the minimum hardware requirement to install SQL Server is approximately 6 GB of hard disk space and a memory of 1 gig for all the edition other than Express. Express will only require 512 megabits. Now, these are again, remember, and I'll keep repeating this, these are minimum system requirements or hardware requirements to be very specific. You should surely not use the exact if you are using these configurations for production environment. Let's move to the next component, which is the very important component called server component, because all your interaction to an external entity using web services or API or client connections or for development will happen through the service tier, the server component. To install service tier, you will require any of these operating system, which is Windows 11 Pro, Enterprise, or Education. That means no home edition allowed. Same Windows 10 Pro, Enterprise, or Education 64-bit. No home edition is will allow you to install server component. You can also have operating system of Windows Server 2022 or 2019 Data Center and Standard. This will also require you to have a Microsoft .NET Framework 4.8. If not on a Windows 10 or 11 system, this component will install it. On Windows Server operating system, you'll have to add that component using the Server Manager. The minimum hardware requirement are hard disk space of 2 GB and a memory based on what kind of operations you will be doing. If you are only running Business Central and not doing any development, then 8 GB would be sufficient. Again, the minimum requirement. If you are doing development and it's a small extension that you're building, which means less than 1000 objects, then 16 GB memory is sufficient. Otherwise, 32 to 64 GB if you are building a large extension. And if you are into D365 sales integration, then it'll require a Windows Identity Foundation, which automatically gets installed during the installation component. Again, a reminder, these are minimum hardware requirement, which is 2 GB of hard disk space or 8, 16 or 32 GB to 64 GB of memory on the service tier. Now let's move to the next component, which allows you to connect to the client component, which is the web server component. All the client communication, either on the phone client or on the tablet client or on the web client, will go through the web server component. And you can install web server component with a Windows 11 or 10 Pro, Enterprise, or Education. Again, no home edition allowed, and the operating system requirement are same as of the service tier, which is Windows Server 2012 and 2019 Data Center and Standard version. Now, as far as hard disk space, it's approximately 2 GB is needed, and memory was not listed more or less in the Microsoft Docs. It also requires an IIS component where your website gets hosted for the web server. If you have it, great. If not, the installer configures it during installation. And that works with the .NET Framework 5.0. So that means your minimum one would be 5.0 at this moment. Now let's talk about developers. So if you are a developer who is working on a Business Central extension, you will install Visual Studio Code, which is one of the prerequisite software, and then the AL language extension, which are part of the Visual Studio Code. But to install Visual Studio Code, these are the preferred version 10, 11, 2019, and 2022. And I'm pretty sure these are not the preferred, but these are the only version where you can install Visual Studio Code. I'm hoping. The hardware requirement, again, 500 GB, and then the number of the memory that you need is based on what kind of development you are doing. If you are into report building, then you will require a SQL report builder or 2019 or a Visual Studio 2019 with RDLC report designer for Visual Studio Code. If you're still building Word reports, which I don't know how many of us are building them, then you will require even Microsoft Word 2019 or later version. Now let's come to the client component. Now we have typically two major kind of clients. One is the web client and the other is phone or tablet client. So for the web client, you will need the Microsoft Edge, Google Chrome or Safari or Firefox, anything with the latest version, any browser with the latest version. For the phone client, it'll surely be part of an app, as in if you are running on a browser on your phone or tablet device, then these remains as it is. But if you are using the mobile app from Business Central, then you'll need an app version of 3.7 or higher, an operating system which is supported for Android or iOS, which is latest the last three versions. 1 GB of memory on your phone or tablet client, and then these are the screen resolution to render the page correctly in those devices. If you'll be dealing with file management and Office application, then you will also need Office on web or Office on mobile or Microsoft Office 2019 to be installed. So that covers everything from an infrastructure part, as in what kind of components you need. Remember, whatever we covered in this video is the minimum requirement, hardware requirement that are needed. So make sure that you size your servers correctly so that your configuration looks great. I'm pretty sure your partner will be able to help you in hardware sizing for your on-prem installation. And I'll see you in the next video with another topic related to Business Central. Hope you like the content. If you learn something new, please do share this video with your friends and family. If you are new to this channel, please do subscribe to the channel. That helps us to understand what kind of content we are making. Are we working on the right direction or should we change something else? So this is Saurav Dhyani signing out, and I'll see you next day.